A man is floating inside a black hole. Around him, 100 versions of his daughter's bedroom. Every moment of her life just out of reach, behind glass he cannot break. She's 10 years old. She's 30. She's dying, and he is pushing, with everything he has, on the second hand of a watch. Because if she feels it, if she just picks it up. But that's the end of the story. Let me tell you the beginning. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about space. But don't worry, it's not really about space. It's about a father and his daughter, and a promise he made that he wasn't sure he could keep. It's about the distance between the people we love and ourselves, and how sometimes that distance is measured in miles, and sometimes in years, and sometimes in something so vast and strange that it doesn't have a name at all. It's a big story, but at its heart, it's very, very small, just a man trying to get home. So settle in, close your eyes. Imagine you're lying in a field at night, and the sky is full of stars, and someone is telling you where they all go. Tonight's story is called The Father Who Fell into the Stars. Let's begin. There was a time, not so long from now, when the earth was tired. Not tired the way you and I get tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep can fix. Tired in a deeper way. The soil was failing. Crops were dying, one species at a time. First the wheat, then the okra. The potatoes held on, and the corn still grew. Endless fields of it. But everyone knew it was only a matter of time. The air was thick with dust. Great storms would roll across the plains, brown and heavy, blotting out the sun for days. People learned to keep their windows shut and their shelves turned face down. They set plates upside down on the table, because by the time they sat down to eat, a fine layer of dust would have settled on everything. Nobody talked about the stars anymore. There was no space program, no exploration, no dreams of what was out there. Humanity had turned inward, focused entirely on the ground beneath its feet, trying to coax one more harvest from the exhausted earth. The world had decided, quietly and firmly, that the age of looking up was over. And in the middle of all this, in a farmhouse surrounded by corn, under a sky that was always a little too hazy, there lived a man named Cooper. Cooper had once been a pilot. Not just any pilot. He'd been an astronaut, or nearly one. He was the kind of man who had been built to fly, whose hands were steadiest when the ground was farthest away. But the world didn't need pilots anymore. The world needed farmers. So Cooper grew corn and fixed tractors and drove his children to school along dusty roads and tried very hard not to look at the sky. He had 2 children, a son named Tom, who was steady and practical and would grow up to be a good farmer, and a daughter named Murph. Murph was 10 years old, and she was furious with the universe. She was curious about everything. She asked questions that didn't have answers. She got into arguments with her teachers because they told her the Apollo missions had been faked, and she knew that wasn't true. She had her father's restlessness, his hunger for something bigger, and she had something else too. Something strange was happening in her bedroom. Books were falling off her shelves. Not randomly, in patterns. Lines of dust on her floor would arrange themselves into shapes that looked almost like language. She called it her ghost. Cooper called it gravity. Something was pushing things, pulling things, leaving messages in the dust and the gaps between books. Neither of them understood it yet, but they would. And when they did, it would change everything. One night, after a dust storm, Merv showed her father something extraordinary. The dust that had blown through her window had settled on the floor in perfect lines, thick and thin like a code, like binary, like someone was trying to tell them something. Cooper stared at it for a long time, and then he realized the lines weren't random. They were coordinates, a place on a map. So he drove. In the middle of the night, with Merv hidden in the back seat because she'd refused to be left behind, he followed the coordinates across dark plains and empty roads until he came to a fence, and behind the fence, a facility, a secret place that the world had forgotten or been made to forget. It was NASA, the last remnant of humanity's space program, hidden underground, funded in secret by people who still believed that looking up was the only way to survive. And the person running it was a man named Professor Brand, an old physicist, brilliant and desperate, who had been working for decades on a single problem: how to get humanity off the dying Earth and onto another world. He told Cooper something remarkable. Years ago, a disturbance had appeared near Saturn, a wrinkle in the fabric of space, a wormhole, a tunnel through the universe, placed there by someone or something unknown, leading to another galaxy entirely. On the other side, there were planets, potentially habitable worlds orbiting a massive black hole called Gargantua. 3 astronauts had already gone through years before. Each had landed on a different world and sent back a signal, promising. But no one had gone to check. No one had gone to see which of these worlds could actually be a new home. Bran needed a pilot, the best pilot. And somehow, the coordinates in Merv's bedroom had led Cooper here. Cooper knew what this meant. He knew it in his body before he knew it in his mind. If he went, he would be gone for years. The distances were vast. The time was uncertain. His children would grow up without him. His daughter, his stubborn, brilliant, furious daughter, would be left behind. But if he didn't go, there might be no world left for her to grow up in. He went home. He sat on the edge of Merv's bed, and he tried to tell her. She already knew. She'd figured it out because she was Merv, and Merv always figured things out. And she was devastated. She begged him not to go. She screamed. She told him the ghost was trying to tell him to stay, that the message in the dust said stay. And maybe it did. But Cooper couldn't. The weight of everything, the dying crops, the dust, the future, pressed him forward. He promised her he would come back. He didn't know when. He didn't know how. But he promised. He drove away. And in the rearview mirror, he could see the farmhouse getting smaller and smaller. And he couldn't see Merv because she hadn't come outside to say goodbye. And that was the thing that nearly broke him. Not the vastness of space, not the danger of the mission, but the image of his daughter's closed bedroom door. The ship was called the Endurance. The crew was small. Cooper, a scientist named Amelia Brand, who was the professor's daughter, and 2 others. There was also a robot named Tars, who was shaped like a tall metal rectangle and had a sense of humor that nobody had asked for. They left Earth quietly. No crowds, no fanfare, just a spacecraft rising through the dust and the haze, punching through the atmosphere. And then, silence, the vast, impossible silence of space. They flew to Saturn first. It took 2 years. 2 years of drifting through the dark, sleeping in shifts, watching the sun shrink to a bright dot behind them. Cooper sent video messages home to his children, talking to a camera in the quiet of the ship, not knowing when or if they'd receive them. And then they reached the wormhole. Imagine a soap bubble, but the size of a planet, a perfect sphere hovering in space near Saturn's rings, its surface shimmering with distorted light from the other side. It looked like a hole in the universe, because that's exactly what it was. A doorway placed there by an intelligence that humanity could not comprehend, leading somewhere impossibly far away. They flew into it. The ship shook and the light twisted, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the laws of physics seemed to pause and reconsider. And then they were through, on the other side, in another galaxy with unfamiliar stars and a black hole so massive that it bent the light around it like a lens. Gargantua, a monster of gravity and time, beautiful and terrible, dominating the sky like a dark eye ringed with fire. And here is where the story becomes something else entirely. Because near a black hole, time doesn't work the way it does on Earth. The stronger the gravity, the slower time passes. An hour near Gargantua could be years, decades back home. Every moment Cooper spent near that black hole, his children were growing older without him. The mission was a race against time, in the most literal sense imaginable. They went to the closest planet first, the one that had sent the most promising signal, a water world, they called it. Miller's Planet, named for the astronaut who had gone there before them. It looked gentle from orbit, a vast, shallow ocean stretching to every horizon, the water only ankle deep. But this planet orbited close to Gargantua, and the time distortion was staggering. Every hour on the surface was 7 years back on Earth. 7 years for every single hour. They landed. The water was warm and calm. They waded out to find Miller's signal and found nothing, just wreckage, just debris. The astronaut was dead. And then Cooper looked up and saw, in the distance, what he had thought was a mountain range. It wasn't mountains. It was a wave, a wall of water the size of a skyscraper, rolling across the shallow ocean toward them, born from the immense tidal forces of the black hole. What followed was desperate. The wave hit them. The ship tumbled. They lost one of the crew. When they finally clawed their way back to orbit, drenched and shaking and grieving, Cooper sat down at the communication console and found 23 years of messages waiting for him. 23 years. He'd been on the surface for 3 hours. He watched his son grow up in a stream of video messages. He watched Tom graduate, get married, have a child, lose that child, grow bitter, grow quiet. He watched his son give up on him, one message at a time, until the messages stopped. And then Merv appeared. She was an adult now, the same age Cooper had been when he left. She had the same eyes, the same fire, and she looked into the camera and said, with a calm fury that was worse than any scream, "Today is my birthday. The age you were when you left, and you're not here. You promised." Cooper wept. In the silence of the ship, surrounded by stars and darkness and the terrible mathematics of relativity, he put his head in his hands and wept for the years he could never get back. They had fuel for one more planet, one more chance. There were 2 options. a world visited by an astronaut named Edmonds, and a world visited by a man named Man. Man's signal was stronger. Man himself was still transmitting, still alive after all these years. They chose Man's planet. It was a frozen world, beautiful in a dead crystalline way. Endless plains of ice under a pale sky, clouds that were frozen solid. And Man was there. They found him in a cryopod, alive, weeping with gratitude at being rescued. But something was wrong with Man. You could feel it in the way he talked. Too eager, too grateful, too desperate. He told them his planet was viable. He showed them data. He said the surface below the ice was promising. He was lying. Man had sent the signal because he was alone and afraid and wanted to be rescued. His planet was dead. There was nothing beneath the ice but more ice forever. He had falsified the data to bring someone, anyone, to save him. And when Cooper began to figure this out, Man tried to kill him. There was a fight out on the ice, in the thin air of a world that had nothing to offer anyone. Man cracked Cooper's visor and left him to suffocate. And then Man tried to steal the Endurance and flee. But he forced a docking hatch that wasn't meant to be forced, and the airlock exploded, and Man died in the vacuum of space, and the Endurance was crippled and spinning and falling toward the frozen world below. What Cooper did next was the kind of thing that only a pilot of his extraordinary skill could do. He flew toward the spinning wreckage, matched its rotation, an impossible maneuver, a dance with physics at its most violent, and docked. He saved the ship. He saved Amelia. But they had almost no fuel left, and they were still in orbit around a dead planet, in a galaxy that wasn't theirs, with one chance remaining. Edmund's planet, the last hope. There wasn't enough fuel to reach Edmund's world, not for both of them. But Cooper had an idea, a terrible, beautiful, selfless idea. They would fly close to Gargantua, use the black hole's immense gravity to slingshot the ship toward Edmund's planet, but to shed enough weight to give Amelia enough momentum. Cooper would have to detach. He would drop into the black hole. He would be lost. He didn't say this as though it were a sacrifice. He said it as though it were the only thing that made sense. Amelia would reach the last planet. She would carry on the mission. And he didn't know what would happen to him. Nobody did. Nobody had ever fallen into a black hole and lived to describe it. But he knew one thing. The years were already gone. Murph was grown. Tom was grown. The time he'd lost was never coming back, no matter what he did. But maybe, on the other side of something incomprehensible, there was still a way to keep his promise. He detached. He watched the Endurance shrink to a point of light, carrying Amelia toward the last hope for humanity, and then he fell into the black hole, into Gargantua, into the dark. What was inside the black hole was not what anyone expected. Cooper didn't die. He didn't burn. He fell through light and gravity and time, and when he stopped falling, he was somewhere impossible. A room, or rather, an infinite corridor of rooms, stretching in every direction. And every room was the same room, Murph's bedroom, her childhood bedroom, but seen from behind the bookshelf, as if he was standing inside the wall, looking out through the gaps between the books. He could see Murph, not one Murph, every Murph, every moment of her life in that room, arranged around him like frames in a film strip. There she was as a little girl, watching books fall from the shelf. There she was crying the day he left. There she was as a teenager, angry and brilliant. There she was as a woman, working at a desk covered in equations. And Cooper understood. The ghost in Murph's room, the books falling from the shelves, the dust arranging itself into coordinates. It had been him. It had always been him. From inside this impossible place, he could reach back through time and touch the world through gravity, the one force that could cross the boundaries of time and space. He was the ghost. He screamed. He hammered on the walls of this prison made of memory and light. He tried to send a message to himself. Stay. Don't go. Stay with your daughter. But he knew, even as he shouted it, that he couldn't change what had already happened. The past was fixed. He had always left. He had always ended up here. And then he understood something else, something larger. He wasn't here to change the past. He was here to save the future. Murph, the adult Murph, the scientist, had been working on an equation. The same equation Professor Brand had struggled with for decades. An equation that would let humanity escape Earth's gravity. An equation that was impossible to solve without one missing piece. Data from inside a black hole. Data that no human had ever been able to collect. Until now. Cooper was inside the black hole. He had the data. And through gravity, through the delicate language of falling objects and ticking watch hands, he could give it to her. He found the right moment, the right Murph, at the right desk, and he began to push. Not books this time. The second hand of a watch he had given her before he left. He moved it in stutters and pauses, encoding the data in Morse code, tick by tick, into the watch she still carried with her after all these years. Because she had never stopped carrying it. She had been furious with him for leaving. She had burned with resentment for years. But she had never put down the watch. Love, it turns out, is a kind of gravity too. It pulls across distances that nothing else can cross. Murph felt it. She was sitting at her desk, decades older than the girl she'd been, and she picked up the watch, and the second hand was moving strangely, stuttering, pausing, ticking in a pattern. And Murph, because she was Murph, because she had always been the one who noticed things, understood, the ghost, the bookshelf, the dust. It had always been her father, reaching across time and space and the inside of a black hole to give her the one thing she needed. She decoded the data from the watch. She solved the equation, and with that equation, humanity finally left the Earth. Not in a panic, not in a disaster, but in a great, slow, hopeful migration. Enormous stations rising from the ground, carrying millions of people into the sky, toward the stars, toward a future that a 10-year-old girl and her father had saved without ever being in the same room. Cooper had kept his promise, not the way he expected, not by flying home in a ship, but by falling through a black hole and whispering through the second hand of a watch. And then the room collapsed. The infinite corridor of Murph's bedrooms folded in on itself, and Cooper was falling again, but gently this time, like sinking through warm water. And when he opened his eyes, he was floating in space near Saturn, and a ship was approaching. They found him. Somehow, impossibly, he was brought aboard a space station, one of the great stations his daughter's work had built. A curved, green, sunlit world inside a spinning ring, with houses and fields and children playing under an artificial sky. He was taken to a hospital room. He was told where he was and when. He had been gone for decades, nearly a lifetime, and Murph was still alive. Barely. She was an old woman now, surrounded by her children and her grandchildren, and she had asked for him. He walked into her room, and there she was, white-haired and frail, lying in a bed by a window that looked out on a green world she had built. She was older than he was now, far older, and he looked exactly the same as the day he'd left, because time near a black hole is a strange and merciless thing. She smiled at him, and she said, "I knew it. I knew you'd come back." She told him to go. She told him he still had time, that no parent should have to watch their child die, and she was surrounded by her family, and she was okay. She had been okay for a long time. She had been angry, yes. For years and years, she had been angry. But she had understood eventually that he hadn't abandoned her. He had fallen, and he had found his way back. Cooper held his daughter's hand, the hand that had once been small enough to fit entirely inside his own. And he said goodbye. And then he left, because Murph told him to, because there was still one more thing to do. Cooper took a ship, a small one, borrowed, pointed toward the stars. On the other side of the wormhole, on a planet orbiting a gentle sun, Amelia Brand had landed. She was alone. She had taken off her helmet and felt alien wind on her face and looked out over a landscape that no human had ever seen. Hills and valleys and a sky with a color that didn't have a name yet. She had started building a shelter, a beacon, the first tiny human footprint on a new world. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, Cooper was flying towards her, toward the future, toward whatever came next, because that's what Cooper did. That's what he had always done. He looked up when the world told him to look down. He flew when they said there was nowhere left to go. I think about Murph's watch, that little ticking thing, sitting on a desk, carrying a message from the other side of the universe. The idea that love might be something physical, something that can cross dimensions, bend time, outlast everything. I don't know if that's true. I'm not a physicist, but I know that every night, all over the world, people lie in the dark and think about the people they love, people who are far away, people who left, people who promised to come back. And maybe the distance between you and them is just space, just time, just the ordinary, crossable kind of far away. I hope so. Sleep well tonight. And if someone you love is far away, know this: the light from every star you've ever seen has traveled a very, very long way to reach you. And it made it. It always makes it. Eventually. Good night.